What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Star Wars Explained. I am very excited to speak with another writer from the High Republic today. She's written some of the most universally celebrated Star Wars novels, including Lost Stars, Bloodline, Master and Apprentice, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and most recently, Into the Dark. Please welcome Claudia Gray. How are you?
Hi.
So happy to have you. I don't think we've spoken on the channel since Dragon Con like 3 years ago.
All of time has grown so misty. If you say 3 years ago, I believe you, but
Who knows? Who
Dragon
can tell?
Con just seems like it belongs to another era completely. And yet they're having one this year, right?
Don't know yet. I hope so.
I
We'll
think I
see how
heard.
things go.
I think I heard that's on the books, but I don't know. Check the websites. Don't take it from me.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, I've been kicking these interviews off with a bit of an icebreaker question. I'd love to
Okay.
know, who is your favorite minor character in Star Wars? So someone that you think you might actually be the biggest fan of.
Ooh, that's a really good one. Let me think. Um, I have this personal headcanon of Yaddle as basically having like Wolverine's personality. Like, like she's the cigar smoking bad girl of the Jedi Council. And she's always breaking the rules and they have to rein her in, but she's just so darn good. She's the best she is at what she does, but what she does isn't very nice. That's I'm pretty sure I'm the only person out there with that headcanon.
Well, that feels like something you could bring to life. I mean, Yoda's around in the High Republic. Yaddle, we haven't seen her yet, but I don't know.
True story. Back a couple years ago, when I started, this was before The Mandalorian had come out, I pitched the idea of a little kid's book, like a children's book, a picture book, with Yoda teaching youngling baby Yaddle. And I was like, think about the little baby Yaddle. Think how cute that is. And they were like, oh, God, how did they not see it? How did they not see the magic? And then The Mandalorian came on, and I was like, oh, they have one. They have one. That's why. They saw it. They saw the magic. They saw it before.
Yeah. But that just means you're on the same wavelength. That's great.
Mm.
I'd also love to ask if you've had the pleasure of drinking the drink that you have created, Port in a Storm, because it exists in a Star Wars cookbook.
I have not had Port in a Storm. We got to go to Galaxy's Edge last February, which was like the last thing I did before lockdown, really. And there they have Tony Ray, the Alderanian wine in the cantina. So I got to have that. Unfortunately, it seems to be Chardonnay based, which is not my jam, but still they have that. So I've had that drink. What's in Port in a Storm?
Port in a
What is its
Storm,
earthly equivalent?
I'll say it is not as it's described in the book. It's not like drinking gasoline. It's actually quite good. It's got rum, port, ginger liqueur, and I think a little bit of lime juice. Oh, and
Ooh,
ginger
no.
beer. It's
Oh,
very good.
that's happening. That's a Star Wars cookbook, you say? All right, I'm going to be checking this out because literally all of those things, yes.
I cannot recommend it enough. I will say, out of universe, it doesn't live up. I was thinking it would knock me on my butt, but it's
Is it one
fine.
of those things you're like, this is delicious, and then all of a sudden you have no knees?
If you're not careful, I'd say so.
Okay, at least that. Maybe we're made of sterner stuff here on Earth.
Maybe.
Maybe our potables are so much more toxic that what they consider to be just devastating is our idea of like, oh, you could put some fruit in an umbrella in this.
Or maybe gasoline actually tastes great in Star
Maybe,
Wars.
maybe. There's fire in outer space. Anything can happen.
Well, I'd love to just get a quick rundown on your own introduction to Star Wars. What was it that pulled you into the fandom, and which story was it that grabbed you and really made you a diehard fan?
Well, I was 6 or 7 the first time I saw it in its original theatrical release. So there isn't one thing. There was a time before Star Wars, which is, very foggy, dim history childhood. And then there was Star Wars, which I loved. And also, and I always say this, like, now that we no longer have the monoculture, like, you cannot approximate how big Star Wars was. Like, you cannot appreciate it. when there were 3 channels and there weren't any movie channels or ways to rent movies. So the movie stayed in theaters for more than a year, and it was on everything, like every magazine. And all of a sudden, all these television shows and movies were kind of trying to do something in space. People like space, right? And, you have Mark Hamill on the Muppet Show. It was just everything, everywhere, always. And there was never any chance that I would recover from that.
Well, you often write young adult books for Star Wars, and a few years back at DragonCon, the first time we spoke, I told you after our interview, and I wished that I had asked this before now, I told you that I had just had the wrong idea about what YA even was. I think Lost Stars was like my first young adult book, knowing that it was a young adult book. I'm sure I read YA growing up, but like I had this unfair stigma on it, and you explained to me why young adult is actually perfect for Star Wars. So what would you say to readers who might be a little bit cautious about being like, I don't know if young adult is for me?
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is young adult. The majority of the movies are about young people taking responsibility for the first time in their lives, or taking a new level of responsibility, in like the case of Leia, for instance, for the first time in their lives. And young adult is really just the coming of age experience. It's not dumbed down. In fact, there are people that argue the younger the reader, the sharper you have to be, and it's the people who can like really hold 5-year-olds who are the geniuses. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I mean, Luke Skywalker, leaving the ranch or getting pulled out of that and getting thrown into this adventure, that is archetypal YA. Anakin's a little young for YA in Phantom Menace, but there you have Padme. And then you do have Anakin's Anakin. I guess that's their name smush. Their company name smush. Anakin? I don't know. But then you have Anakin in Attack of the Clones, and that's him redefining himself differently than he does just as Obi-Wan's apprentice. And then you have Rey and Finn, both in The Force Awakens. They're both probably a little old for YA, but not by much. And it's still that moment of, I'm setting out. I'm going to do this thing that wasn't prescribed for me. I'm going to lead this life that's different. I'm going to look at things with my own perspective. And that's really all YA is.
I have always loved that description, and it's just something that I didn't understand until you told it to me. And I was like, I got to get this for other people, because I still get that question all the time.
Yeah, I mean, before Lost Stars came out, there were, shocker, angry people on the internet, and they were going, we don't need young adult in Star Wars. And I was like, have you seen Star Wars? Because I have a really terrible surprise for you.
Well, on the flip side, you've written plenty of adult titles as well. What are the biggest challenges or advantages to writing adult versus YA?
It's not that different an experience, to tell you the truth. You don't center the YA coming of age experience, but then beyond that, you really don't have any exact formula you have to follow. So, not that you have an exact formula you have to follow in YA either. There's just a common theme that's going to be present in it in some way. But honestly, approaching the writing of it, there is not a meaningful difference.
Cool. You've also written for every era of Star Wars, I think, and even some stories set in between eras. But now you're venturing into kind of this uncharted territory with the High Republic, where you're making your own with the other 4 writers. So how has tackling each existing era of Star Wars storytelling prepared you for something brand new?
Well, I mean, you get a really thorough grounding in the universe, though I can't claim it was writing that gave me that. It was being a huge nerd fangirl my whole life and obsessing about all this stuff that did that. But, I guess it meant I already owned everything when it came time to go and look things up. But you like to be really grounded in that universe and have a sense of the depth of the world building and the length of the world building. If you're a fan of Knights of the Old Republic, which tons of people are, including me, and I believe this is canon, there's always that little bit of a, but I believe this is canon. And that means this history goes back 10,000 years at least. And so you have a lot of space to work with there, no pun intended. And so it was the question, I guess the big question was sort of how to make it feel familiar and like it belonged in Star Wars, and yet make it feel like a time we hadn't seen before, to give it distinguishing characteristics that are unique to the High Republic.
As a fan of the Knights of the Old Republic, how has it been developing something that isn't, it's in the past, but not quite that far past, but also you have been introducing these little differences between, that 4,000 years ago and now we're 200 years ago. But it feels like there are going to be some changes that kind of ripple out there. Has that been something that's on your mind at all?
I'm trying not to, I can't speak for the others. I'm trying very hard not to deliberately create a bridge like, oh, this leads to this, which leads to that, which leads to this, which leads to what we see in the Phantom Menace. Exactly. Because I worry too much about that creeping into my writing. And these Jedi, as far as they're concerned, this is the way that things are. I mean, they're not idiots. They know that time changes and history changes, but this is the Jedi Order as they perceive it. This is the state of the Republic as they see it. And it's important for me to kind of keep that mindset steady, cool. I think.
About a year ago at this point, during the High Republic reveal event, we got to see this picture of an infamous whiteboard. I've asked all the writers about this, and they always laugh. But I really like that list of just what Star Wars meant to all of you. And I was wondering if you had anything that you added to the list that you knew just had to be up there.
I haven't spent as much time looking at that whiteboard. I looked at it a lot when we were there. I haven't seen it since, so I can't really declaim off the top of my head exactly what I said versus what somebody else said. But, I feel like the things I either did or would have brought up if somebody didn't beat me to it would be that sense of the light versus the darkness, real depth of world building, the sense of the epic quality to it, the fantasy elements that really tie it much more. People call it science fiction, but if you look at real sci-fi, like hard sci-fi, and you look at stuff like the Arthurian sagas or whatever, it's clear Star Wars really has more to do with the fantasy epics, and so those qualities I think have always really appealed to me.
I'm going to use that I have a friend that we are always debating whether it's more sci-fi or more fantasy. And I'll be like, Claudia agrees with me.
There's fire in outer space.
Right.
There's fire in outer space. It's not science fiction.
That I totally agree. He was asking me about like, well, in The Last Jedi, when the lasers are arcing through space, I'm like, that's the least of it. There's literal space magic. Like,
yeah, it's hilarious to me when somebody like nitpicks, this one thing isn't accurate. And it's like, nor is there like Einsteinian, relativity. When you go between planets, there's a now. There's not a now. There's no now in outer space. But, Star Wars ignores all the stuff that would get in the way of the storytelling. It's space fantasy, and it's done with kind of the depth and the richness that keeps it from feeling like a cheat. Sometimes space fantasy feels a little bit like a cheat, like, oh, this could just be castles, but you made it a spaceship or whatever. It can feel like that. Star Wars does not, because of that world building. I say this a lot in interviews, but I do believe like the two great world builders in the 20th century were Tolkien and Lucas. And Lucas has, I don't know if anything has Tolkien depth, because that guy cut deep. Like, I only learned this, I think, this year. Apparently, words like Hobbit and things like that, in the languages of Middle-earth, that's not the word. He took the word in his head from that language and the root words that made it up, and chose the English root words that were most like that to come up with the closest cognate, and that's what he used. Like, that's a really deep dive. But I really feel like that's part of what hooks you about Star Wars, is that world feels lived in. It feels like it has a really long history, and the High Republic lets us tell part of that history.
Has there ever been anything that you've been writing that you maybe did want to stick to a little more realism and had to force yourself to let it be a little more fantastical?
Not in terms of like, oh no, I can't do this thing, but like I've always been really tempted to have a scene where the gravity goes out on a ship and everybody's floating around and having to try and manage in a battle. And even though there's absolutely no reason that couldn't occur, you don't see a ton of that. We don't ask where the gravity is coming from on the Millennium Falcon. We don't ask what that is, and it's just as well that we don't.
It's definitely something that I would say is inconsistent in Star Wars. It's not like it doesn't bother me, but they have absolutely. Star Wars Rebels had one of those anti-gravity fights.
Yeah. They do have it, but
yeah,
it's just not a thing you do a lot.
Yeah. Or if you're watching The Force Awakens and sometimes they're doing flips and everyone's fine. Sometimes BB-8 is rolling around the ship and it's like, well, it happens when it's fun. And
exactly.
It doesn't happen other times.
It has momentum when it needs to have momentum. And you do see moments of anti-gravity. I'm able to work in some anti-gravity, but there are moments where I'm like, that's going to feel too much like something that isn't Star Wars to me.
I love what you have to say about the Force. You brought up the light and the dark earlier, and Qui-Gon's line in Master and Apprentice about choosing the light because it is the light and not to win some cosmic game. I really love that line. What is important to you when you are writing about the Force?
Remembering that, I think there is sort of a shortcut concept that way too many fans seem to have bought into, that the Force is sort of some superpower that you have, and it's the light side or the dark side, or and that therefore actions don't matter somehow. And it's like, no, staying aligned to the light means your actions do matter. They matter intensely. The way that you conduct yourself, the way that the character conducts him or herself, it's important to suggesting like where they are strongest when they are most firmly aligned with the light. And that can be really grand sweeping things, or it can be small things. I think there's a moment in Master and Apprentice where Qui-Gon cuts down a tree to save Obi-Wan and briefly like has this moment of communion with the tree, that the life of which he's ended, because trees have the Force. They have a being. We know this from The Empire Strikes Back, that this is a thing that you take into account. And I've always sort of had a theory that some of the pushback with Kylo Ren was the first time they showed like, yeah, if you have the dark side, if you're strong in the dark side, it means being miserable all the time. You're always angry. You're always afraid. You're always resentful. That's what that is. You're not wandering around like feeling good about yourself, and manifesting the dark side. That stuff really takes you over. And I thought that was one of the really great parts of the sequel trilogy, and something that Adam Driver really brought to it is, he's miserable every second. And that's the core of it. That's what it is.
Do you really like writing Qui-Gon? Because I love that the short story you did, also Master and Apprentice, is he your favorite Jedi to write for, or has someone in the High Republic ousted it? Or
my favorite Jedi to write for. I really like Qui-Gon a lot. Let me write a few more Jedi before I make a definitive rule, though. I've had up until the High Republic, I've had a pretty low quotient of Jedi, but I really enjoy Qui-Gon a lot, because I feel like by the time of the Phantom Menace, he's one of the few remaining mystics in the Order. Yoda gets back in touch with that clearly after the events of the prequel trilogy, and reconnects with this part of it very fully and completely, but he's kind of lost his way a little bit in the prequel trilogy. Apart from a few moments in the Clone Wars, if you look at the movies themselves, I don't think there's a single moment where he says anything sort of transcendent the way that he does in The Empire Strikes Back. That element has been lost, and and that's what the Order has lost touch with. But Qui-Gon hasn't lost touch with it, and that's part of what makes him a little bit of a misfit.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. In your mind, how are the Jedi most different at this point in the High Republic than they are in the prequel trilogy?
Yeah, I think they're not as dogmatic. There's not as much insistent, like, this is the one proper way to be a Jedi. People follow the Force in different ways. The Order isn't so much tied. I mean, they're tied to the Republic, but they're not sort of doing what the Chancellor says do automatically. And so you see more emphasis on sort of the scholarly sides, the mystical sides. You have way seekers who sort of peel away from the council, and they're going to go follow the Force in their own way, but they continue to be Jedi and are welcome back to the Order whenever they want. You have the temple in Coruscant, you have the council, but you have other important temples, and there's not that same strict hierarchy that's all centralized in one way. So you have a greater diversity of thought and practice, and there's less sense that anybody sort of has the monopoly on the way that you do this or the way you are to think about this. And it allows for a lot more flexibility, and it allows for different Jedi with different personal strengths to really flourish in a way that they might not later. You really wonder if somebody like an Anakin, or even, somebody closer to the bone, I guess, than like Ahsoka Tano, like, they might fare a lot better in an era that was a little bit more flexible and accepting of different ways of doing things.
Yeah, we've speculated exactly that. And we've seen a lot of different, not just variety in the type of Jedi, but things in the way they dress or like their lightsaber colors. Was that a conscious effort to show that just things are a little bit different and more open? Or
Yeah. Well, just different, and different not only from what we've seen before, but different within itself. That there's just a little bit more flexibility and individuality allowed, and not only allowed, embraced.
Mhm. A recurring theme is that we see all the Jedi and how they view the Force in very different, unique ways. Have you thought about how you would view the Force if you were a Jedi?
I have, and I've come up with a really great answer. And am I going to be able to remember it right now? I think what I came up with in the end was like a vast circulatory system. You can't see it from within it, but all these things are connected. They're all alive, and what's happening in one place connects eventually to everything everywhere. Even if you can't immediately see that connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's very cool.
All right.
We've been talking about the light side a lot, but I want to jump over to the dark side because
Okay.
you get to introduce the Dringir to the Star Wars galaxy. What do you think is the scariest thing about them?
For me, the scariest thing about them is that they're truly alien in a way that you don't see much in Star Wars. I mean, it is such a great, awesome, big, diverse galaxy, but that also sort of means like not much is really surprising to people. Your co-pilot is a flying squid, and your neighbor's a Wookiee, and you grew up near these ice monsters that come out or do whatever. It's everybody's used to a really, really wide array of life forms and events and etc. And so very little feels alien to them. But the Drengir are alien. They're profoundly alien. They don't want the kinds of things that, animal life forms, as different as they are from each other, all want. They don't want to form any kind of connection. They are really profoundly different. And if you think about it, that is not something that happens a ton in Star Wars. So I think that's really the creepy edge to lean in on.
This question might be getting to the point where you can't so much answer them.
Okay.
But I'm curious. It seems so quick to add yet another threat with everything already going on with the Great Disaster, and then like immediately here's another problem. Uh, is the Great Disaster enough for the Jedi to deal with, or are you just trying to make things worse and worse and worse?
I would say neither. I mean, we know that this era, we've known this since A New Hope, this era, there isn't any massive intergalactic war on the scale that all three movie series are built around. Like, that's the mythology, is that for so many generations, there was no such thing. But it does not follow that things were then uneventful.
Mhm.
And if you had an entire group of psychic wizards, bringing peace and justice to the galaxy, there was always a need for that. And so it's not about piling things on and making them worse. It's about accepting, like, even when everything is going great, there are always going to be issues. There are always going to be problems. There are always going to be conflicts. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah, that's something I just hadn't really thought about, is that yes, there hasn't been a full scale war for 1,000 years. And it just in my mind, I'm thinking that like, oh, the things with the Nile are going to come to a head and there will be a war. But now it's like, and you don't have to answer this. I'm just kind of speculating. So this
I
is going to
mean,
be like,
it's not saying, I don't feel like I'm spoiling much by saying there's not going to be a war on the scale of those three movies. One, because that's just Star Wars canon, and two, because those are big wars.
right.
Those are wars with literal trillions of combatants. And what is it? The Dreadnought has roughly like the surface of Pluto. Like, those are on a big scale. There's so much room for other things to be happening.
Yeah, but like in my mind, I was still kind of like, yeah, we're gonna build to like a galactic civil war level. But I kind of like this idea that we're gonna see the shift in the Jedi, but it's not going to be like one big thing. It's gonna be kind of like a death by a million cuts. And I'm just speculating, and I think that's a cool idea. But we have to. We're getting close to the end, but we have to talk about Geode because
Okay.
I love him to death. I
Thank
have to
you.
know what was the inception for that character. Did you try to like challenge yourself to see if you could make people fall in love with someone who looks like a rock? And how does it feel to know that you succeeded?
Thank you for pointing out that he looks like a rock, but is not
Yes.
one. He's a Vindian. Honestly, it came about. I had Leox, and I knew he needed somebody on the ship besides Affy. I felt like that ought to be a trio for some reason. And Leox is, this combination of like 90s Matthew McConaughey and the dude from Big Lebowski. And he enjoys hearing himself talk, and I enjoy writing him talking. So I knew I didn't want somebody mega talkative, but I didn't want to do, diet Chewbacca back there. And it was like, it has to be something that's really different from that. And it was actually my boyfriend who was like, what if it's a rock? And I was like, and the fun of writing the character has been realizing, and sometimes I don't realize it until I'm putting it down, but realizing how many ways there are to register reactions, expressions, empathy, whatever, that don't involve words or even necessarily, movement, that you have all these semantic things that lead to that. And so you get to have Geode expressing a great deal and having these connections, while those who are sort of unwilling to really engage with his, I don't know, personhood, we can call it that, are just going, it's a rock. But yeah, he's tremendous fun to write. I'm really glad that you love him.
I desperately hope that we haven't seen the last of him. Just all that I've had some people, like friends who are on kind of the tertiary, the side of Star Wars. They're like, so there's this rock character. I was like, he's the best, and I just tell them why. Like the things that you describe him doing, but we don't get to see. It's so much fun to imagine. Like what does it look like when Geode is doing that?
What does it? Yeah, he makes you do the work.
Yeah, which is kind of like that, almost that horror thing, where it's scarier when you don't see it. It might be funnier when you don't see some of this stuff.
Sometimes, yeah.
And you brought up Leox. I wanted to talk about him as well. Star Wars is saturated with likable smuggler characters. And
Yeah.
how did you go about creating Leox as well and making someone who felt new and unique?
Yeah, he needed to have his own voice, and I was just trying to think of a lot of times when I'm first creating characters, I cast them with actors. That doesn't stick necessarily. Usually it evolves out from there, but something like that can give me a hint of the voice. And once I start to get the voice, then the rest of it can come to that. Like one of my young adult novels, A Thousand Pieces of You, I had sort of this young genius type who was kind of arrogant, but I wanted him to be likable, but he was super arrogant. And I'm like, what? And then finally it hit me. I was like, this is Tony Stark without money, and then he became young Robert Downey Jr. And then that character became Theo and became himself and went off in his own directions, but you can build from that. And so I was trying to think, like, who does not sound like anybody else really, and had recently watched True Detective. And so I was like, Matthew McConaughey does not sound like anybody else. And so it built from that. Like I said, it wound up having, I think, as much to do with the dude, but that was sort of the origin of it, because I wanted a guy who was laid back and funny and philosophical, sometimes in an absurd way and sometimes in an actually meaningful way. And there's no telling which is going to come out of his mouth. Yeah, Leox came out of all of that.
Well, I've got one more question, and it's the one that I always close out with because I know that you can't answer it at all, really. But I have to ask. All the other authors have pretty much teased what they've got coming in the High Republic, except for you. So I'm just curious, do you have anything that you're working on that you can tell us about, or
I'm not allowed to name what I'm working on. I can say I'm working on something. That's what I'm allowed to say. But that's it, I'm afraid.
That's fine. I figured that would be the answer. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us. Where can people find you, follow you online, and maybe what books would you recommend to Star Wars fans that aren't Star Wars books?
Well, my website is badly in need of updating, but it is claudiagray.com, Gray with an A. I'm not on social media that much anymore, but my assistant keeps things updated. And, for instance, once there are events again, the events will be listed there. I do sometimes post things on like Pinterest or whatever. Wherever you're online, you can probably follow me there if you wish. And you will see things about me, even if I'm not necessarily the one putting it up there. And if you're interested in space opera out there, I would suggest Defy the Stars is one that has, it takes place in the far future of Earth, when you have a lot of colony worlds who have just reached the point really of having their own culture and wanting independence from Earth, and the problems thereby. That came out of the idea, what if the movie Prometheus didn't suck? Read the book to see where I got that from. Or if you really just like science fantasy a lot, I like A Thousand Pieces of You. It is about the daughter of two famous scientists chasing her father's killer through alternate dimensions.
Cool. Sounds awesome. Well, thank you again for taking the time to talk High Republic with us. Hopefully we can do this again whenever your next story comes out. I'd love to have you again. But
okay, great. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.